Professor.
Changing directions, right? Career paths and stuff. What have you found?
So, get involved, treat your job as your reason for being.
And we're live. Oh my gosh. The mentor, my mentor, fitness, Vinny Finneran, out of originally, I met him in Chicago. That story, man, you're the best in storytelling. So, love a good story.
It's an Irish
Looking
thing,
forward
Greg.
to talking a bit more. And so, welcome to Imagine Fitting In. This
Thanks for having
podcast
me,
is
Greg.
reminding listeners, and I'm sure you're welcome. This podcast purpose is to highlight people's journeys, stories, and paying specific attention, respect, and honor to mentoring and mentors in our lives. And so, Vinny and I, oh boy, I can always still remember, if I summarize how I got to you and just that first meeting. My friend's friend says, yeah, I have a friend that wants to get in the fitness business. He's like, oh, the other guy goes, oh, let me call my buddy Vinny. And all of a sudden, back through the friend, okay, you've got an appointment. I'm like, at that point, I had long hair, a beard. I was in advertising. I was not happy. And I'm just thinking, okay, how can I, make my way? So, oh, this is a great opportunity. I don't want to blow it. And then I find out it's like in one of the top newest clubs in Chicago, off of Michigan Avenue. Five levels, 180,000 square feet with an indoor rock climbing wall.
Seven
And
levels
my
with
eyes
a
are bugging
100-foot
out
climbing
going,
wall.
oh. Was it 7 levels?
7
or 5?
levels.
Remember
and
that?
It got 5 above the ground and 2 below. And we had the 107-foot climbing wall right up the middle of the place.
Right. And so I come in, I think you're on level 4 or something, level the basketball court. I go and I interview, and I'll never forget this. You go through the entire interview and you're like, well, I've interviewed people that I actually interviewed one of my professors from UIC or something for a position. And I go, I'm all hired up. And then out of the grace of God, the Irishman saw something in this kid, 28, looking for an adventure, love fitness, always been doing it for, at that time, 8, 20. A good solid, what was I, 28? 18, I was doing it for a good solid 10 years. Passionate about it, helping people. And then you go at the end of the interview, well, I'm all hired up, and I'm thinking, oh, my chance, my head's kind of almost going, oh, and all of a sudden he goes, you know what? I'm going to hire you to be my cheerleader. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't hear anything. I didn't hardly hear that after you said, I'm going to hire you. So thank you all the way back in that day. That was just fantastic. And I still
like
speak
said,
of you
Greg,
today, your track and field. Yep.
I'd been interviewing about 40 people a day at that time. And like you said, it was someone whose research I had in graduate school who's looking for a job. We were going for the best people in town, and you came in, and it comes down to, my mother always used to say I was a good judge of bad whiskey, which is an Irish saying for you're a good judge of character. So there's this Greg Jankowski guy comes in, a very Chicago sounding name. And I said, he's got it. There's something that people have that want to share what they have, their energy, their honesty, their outlook. And you could have a guy with big muscles, or the guy whose research I read doesn't happen. It's not there. So I gambled a little bit, but look, we won. I got a great staff person. We had a wonderful staff, and you went on to much bigger and better things than I.
Oh, well, you know what? The thing about that is that no, 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 sir. You went on and you saw something. And I'm going to go not to go in detail. I was there busy with opportunity. You launched me. I kicked some butt with it after you left, and then somebody calls me up to say, "Pop over to this other club. I think you would be good over here." So that was over at the
Yeah.
Chicago. What's the name? What's the name of
LaSalle
the
Pub?
gym? LaSalle Club. Oh my gosh, that was
Yes.
another grand adventure. But beside
Yes.
that, to the audience members, this is why he's the king in my book, and I had to have him on. Quick toot sweet. So we're gonna learn more about Vinny, um, and he has got quite the story. I just love talking with him, and let's kind of start with like where were you born, school stuff. What was that like?
Well, I was born in the Bronx, New York City, and there were six of us, both my parents from Ireland, and we're all packed into a two-bedroom apartment on the fifth floor of a walk-up, and I thought we were rich because we had a view. I could look out my bedroom window and see the Empire State Building and the whole Manhattan skyline looking south. Um, it was a spectacular place to grow up. It was rough, but we were out the door at 6 in the morning for swim practice, and then to school, and swim practice again after. Then it was Boy Scouts, altar boys, choir, everything. The day just kept going and going, and it was different people. It was wonderful people, some crazy people, but it was a spectacular place to grow up. It really was. I wouldn't want my kids growing up there now. It's a little more dangerous than it was when I was
Right.
there, but it was a great way to grow up. Close family. We're still very close. My parents are gone, but the rest of us carry on.
That's just an awesome story, and the fact that I just relate that to when we're young, and when you have the family, you have a home. You had that little vision outside the window, and there you go. You're kind of launching an excitement. And so then, did you go to school in the Bronx? How long were you in the Bronx until you got to
Yeah.
Chicago?
Um, Went to school, 12 years, Catholic school. It was 2 blocks away. 56 kids in a class with one nun. And after 8 years of that, you went next door to the high school where the boys and the girls were separated then because they figured our guns were loaded and we were dangerous in the same rooms. So that was rough. For those, it's all those Catholic school stories you heard. We had it. There's a lot of corporal punishment and that. But I just had my 50th high school reunion, and my friends and I. It's as if we never parted. We're all that close, and that's the way it was. All of our parents, for the most part, were off the boat from Ireland. We're all
hmm
poor. We all had cockroaches in our houses. Um, we all went through all these wild experiences of being a kid in New York City in the 60s.
Wow.
It was
So,
book worthy, but I haven't written the book on it.
okay, I can imagine. So those years, what were roughly the years when you were in the Bronx? From the 60s, like, were you there all the way till you went to college?
Yeah, I stayed in the Bronx and went to Rutgers University, about an hour and a half away by bus because we didn't have a family car. Um, and, that being in high school, I was an artist, and I did my first drawing at 16 months. I was doing portraits by the time I was 6. I wanted to go to art school, so I majored in fine arts at Rutgers University and had some amazing teachers. And but school was sort of the background for what I did. I got very involved in politics, uh, just exciting things. Did some traveling up and down the East Coast, generally at protests. But it was very eye opening because our Irish neighborhood was very cloistered. It was very monochrome, and
Okay.
going out to a school, especially it was sort of an experimental school, the campus I was at, Livingston College. Um, it was a
In what
real
sense?
eye opening experience for me, and I loved it.
When you when you say experimental, what do you mean by that?
They'd started this branch to focus on art and music, but also social issues. Like we had the headquarters for the Black Panthers on our campus. Um, we had Puerto Rican studies, women's studies. We had some of the best musicians. We had a spectacular jazz department. All of our music was pretty much jazz. So you had all of these musicians from New York City who were on our faculty. So we would have faculty concerts that you would have paid $100 for back in the '70s, right there, in the student union.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
it was just amazing. Everything about it was amazing.
Found out and discovered later after knowing you for a while that you played guitar and you were that much of a musician. I didn't realize per se artist. My question is, do you still have that drawing you did the first?
No, you know what? My parents probably wanted to strangle me. You'd have some paper lying around or something I'd take from my brother's books. But my parents saved up and bought a whole set of Funk and Wagnall encyclopedia. And
Okay.
inside each cover were blank pages. So I thought, this is golden. I've got all this material to work on. So, my mother would see I was busy, thought I was looking at the encyclopedia at 2 years of age, and I was drawing any blank space it was. And it was usually about scuba diving because I used to watch Sea Hunt and Diver Dan and this stuff.
Okay.
Um, but that's, I often wonder
Th-
what
That is
became of those things
super
that I
cool.
done.
Right. And then, that's, I mean, obviously that was a tumultuous time. Obviously, really, the major cities, the heart of the beat, the school you in was obviously very progressive for the time. Um,
It was.
and so that was a high school, or what was it a high school or
That
elementary?
was that was university. So that was Livingston College,
Oh, university.
division of Rutgers has 5 campuses, and I was at the art and music
Oh,
school.
that's right. Yeah, pardon me. Yeah. Um, so now here's a question. What propelled from the Bronx, and from Rutgers,
Hmm.
to how did you get to Chicago?
Well, during the summers I lifeguarded Rockaway Beach, as the Ramones sing about. That's where I spent every summer of our lives. Lifeguarded there, and when I finished, I had nothing lined up. I had a degree in art, and I said, what? I'm going to explore a little bit. I'm going to see what the rest of the country, because I've always had wanderlust. You have no family car.
Okay.
I went wherever the subway would take me, and then we used to hop freight trains out of the city to go into upstate New York. So I came out primarily to Chicago to run the marathon with my brother. It was his first marathon. And I said, well, yeah, I'll come out and do it. Then I'm going to head west from there. So I was in
Okay.
Chicago 2 days, and my mother called and said one of my childhood friends had just passed away um, from a
Oh
drug
goodness,
overdose.
I'm sorry.
So this is a kid that,
Mm,
our mothers used to bathe us in the same tub when we were babies. And when I,
wow.
followed the path of athletics and all of that, he just got deeper into drugs. And he was, she was 23 when he died. And so I got back in my Volkswagen Beetle and drove straight back to be at his wake and his burial. And and I realized I didn't want to be in New York anymore. So I got back in the car, drove back to Chicago. Did not run the marathon because I had an Achilles injury, but just liked Chicago so much. Beautiful city. I always thought it was Elliott Ness and Stockyards, but when you end up in Chicago on a beautiful September day, and you're down at Buckingham Fountain, you get hooked on the place pretty quick. So I called
Right.
my girlfriend who was in New York, and I said, "You want to move to Chicago?" And she said, "Sure." And so
Wow.
that was a week that I went out there for 45 years. I stayed there. And my ex girlfriend got married and still lives out there. Married to
In
someone other
Chicago.
than me, obviously, in Chicago. She lives out in the western suburbs.
Right.
And then my wife
Okay.
um, went out there for law school. She's from Boston. So here we were, two East Coast people. We met in the running community. And that was 40 years ago.
Right. So I see here in some of the notes that in your college years, that Dr. Phil, is it Shinnick?
Shinnick, yes. So I mean,
Shinnick.
you talk
Okay.
about mentors. Uh, Phil was one of my professors, and he taught sports sociology. He was a very ahead of his time, radical sports personality, and he'd been an Olympic long jumper and fascinating guy. His doctorate was in economics. But we got to talk in class, and we went out for a run together, and became very, very close friends for years. I ended up renting an apartment, a room in the hippie house in town, and
There you go.
but he was a guy who, he's from the West Coast, from the state of Washington, um, but he was so unique and so curious. When he used to travel with the U.S. national team or the Olympic teams, he'd go and he'd find all the Russian coaches and the Eastern Bloc coaches and find out what they did for training. Um,
Trying to quiz him.
so back in 1974 or so, we were doing deep water training with life vests on, big cork Coast Guard things that became in vogue again in the running community for injured runners, back in the 2000s. We were doing it in the 70s. We made our weights out of paint cans and cement and plumbing pipe. But it was always an adventure with Phil. But the great thing about him was he was brilliant as far as training, science of training. He wanted to. He thought he'd give a try to make the '76 Olympic team again. So I got to train with him, learn about the long jump in particular, but he was also a decathlete.
Okay.
Had the world record in the long jump, but just a guy who just oozed curiosity and would search everything out. And I said, I want to be able to do that. And I learned to ask questions, and wherever I could find a mentor, and not meaning to find a mentor, but if somebody had something to offer, to talk about, to teach me, there I'd be.
Right,
Teach me.
right.
Yeah, I'm an open book.
Excite, ex,
And Phil,
exciting you so much that
yeah,
did it did it like, obviously you probably connected like, oh my gosh, you're talking all my language, all that strain in your own being. And was
yeah,
he older than you? And
yes.
um um then you obviously trained with him. And so how did that pan out? And is he still around today and everything?
He's still around today. He was very involved with Chinese medicine and acupuncture. He still practices in New York City. Um, Still a fascinating man. If you think of somebody who's about 6'2", weighs maybe 160 pounds, and is like a thoroughbred with just like skin spray painted
Okay.
over muscle and vein. To be, to be around, a world class athlete like that, and to learn so much. And he was always,
Yeah.
always giving with information, whatever questions I had. He was there for it, and he loved, you know, athletes preach a lot. I know I do, and I know you do. We want to share what we have. And
Right.
Phil was that way. He was just very generous with his knowledge.
So with your relationship with him, did any of that directly like propel you toward the Chicago direction, or he was in your world, and then you decide to run that marathon, and all of a sudden you got attracted to Chicago?
Well, he instilled in me this curiosity and everything. When I went out to Chicago, my secondary reason for going out of there, primary, was to get out of New York City. But I wanted to get a qualifying time for the 800 meters for the Olympic trials. I said, you know what? Why not? My high school career in running was very good. My college career was not. So here I was. I had time to train. I had people to train with. So that was one of my goals, which I never achieved, but not for lack of trying. Um, so, like many runners, I sold running shoes. And it was a chance sale, selling running shoes, that I met a woman, sold her a pair of shoes. I still remember what they were. And she's one of the higher ups at this new health club that was opening. So I thought, I'd never been in a health club. We didn't have them in the old days. You had the YMCA maybe. So she says,
what year was this?
tell me all about this is the East Bank Club.
What year was that?
This was 1979. And so I'd been out there about a year doing things, drove a school bus for a week, just odds and ends to keep myself going. So she told me that an indoor 400-meter track, my eyes lit up. I said, do you need anybody to work there?
Wow.
Oh, yeah, we're hiring. So, here I had a degree in art. I was selling sneakers, but I'd been a lifeguard. I'd saved many, many lives, lots of experience. So I started there as a lifeguard, and they liked the way I spoke to people. So they asked me if I wanted to work the front desk. I said, sure.
There you go.
If someone floats something in front of me, I'm going to grab it. Then from there, I was manager at the front desk, and then they said, would you like to be one of the two assistant managers at the club? Sure. I thought, I have no idea what to do. And then there was another mentor, the guy who was the manager, a man by the name of Ray Balladad. And Ray was super calm, very chill, but he and I would walk around the club. And he told me, he'd been in the tennis business for years. He'd been a former tennis pro. And the thing that, of all the stuff he told me about the types of soap and where you buy stuff and all the little minutiae that makes a first-rate club first-rate, we would walk around and he would never leave a piece of litter on the floor. Any piece of paper, carpet fuzz, anything, he'd pick it up. And here's the guy who's the manager of the biggest club in the country and the fanciest. And he never thought twice about picking up the garbage. And to me, that was an aha moment. This is where you are invested in a place so much that you want it as clean or cleaner than your own home, because you have thousands of guests coming to your home away from home. And so he taught me so many things. And when I left the club to start opening other clubs in that, I could always call him. And actually, when I went to graduate school, I needed some part-time work. Boom, I was hired at the club. And he says, would you like to do more? I said, I just need some hours. I need some money. But he was always there. Again, generous, detailed, calm. And here I was, an art major, running I was the manager from 4 p.m. till midnight, the busiest time, thousands of people. It was the center of the Chicago social scene at the time. It was like, Oprah's working out there.
Learning.
Yeah.
I remember learning about the East Bank Club, and I didn't realize that obviously, number one, I had heard about it, and I was in advertising. I didn't have any credentials. I was trying to get certified as a trainer and get involved, but it almost felt like it was not doable or approachable. And it was like, maybe like I was talking, it would take too much, right? And then I heard about the fact that, I'm not sure people realize this, but it may still be. Is it still around today? I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the time, It was the single highest grossing location in the country. It probably still is.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah. We used to have club owners and managers from Japan come just to look at it and tour them around the place to see how we did it. You know, we had brass cover plates on the electrical outlets. Everything we had was
right on the
the
Chicago
best.
River too, right? It's right on
Yeah.
the
Oh,
Chicago
yeah.
River.
We had rats
Chicago.
coming in the day we opened.
I bet. Oh my gosh. I
But
mean, that is like,
but
that time, like you said, there was no really other club scene. The whole concept of the health club came about right after
yes.
what? Bodybuilders butt heads into with racket sports, or did they overtake the
Yes.
racket sports industry with the weights and classes?
Well, you know, the back then racquetball was in. Tennis has always been in. We had lots of tennis courts there because the executive director was a former tennis pro, and the main investors were tennis people. But we knew that there was, market for strength training. So we had a Nautilus room, we had a free weight room. Aerobics was
Right.
gigantic back then, and they hadn't even started personal training. They said, "Nah, people don't want that." And my friend Don Gordon and I said, "Yes, they do. We're out here talking to these people." So we were the first club to do personal training. And that
I have
was,
a question for you.
1980. Yes.
I have a question for you. When I was in LA, I met a friend who's a great trainer out in Los Angeles named Tom Marshall. And I met him at Sports Club LA, I believe it was called. Anyways, on the west side in Santa Monica. Well, we ended up doing some other work, and one of his friends, also a trainer, he said, "I want to introduce you," because he's got his own studio, right? It's like a trainer's gym, whatever. And I meet him. I have a whole conversation. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Chicago. I used to work at the East Bank Club. Do you remember a guy named Brad something? I can't remember his last name right now. Brad.
Well,
I
the
can't.
only
I
Brad
can't
I know
believe
that was
I
a trainer was
texted my buddy today.
uh,
Brad sound familiar?
well, the only Brad that I knew who was a trainer was Brad Barish, who was at the LaSalle Club. But he was in Chicago.
Okay.
I don't think he ever worked in LA. And I left East
Right.
Bank after 3 or 4 years. There were 14 of us that were hired to start with, and I'm still in touch with several of them. But after that, I went on my own, and people started coming in. The reputation was there. It was the place to make your mark. If you got a job there, then you'd made it.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Some of the
literally, I'm literally slowly, and actually my guests are starting to, people that don't know me, they're going to slowly start understanding where my background is and how I was in advertising and got into fitness.
Mhm.
And you're my man. You gave me my first opportunity. You, uh, your tutorials were fantastic with, track and field stretching and all that. And then, obviously meeting Tim, and all I remember is everybody was just saying, train to move, man, train to move, save your joints.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'd started on the Arnold route because I was typical young kid that wanted to lift weights and be bigger. So, as now
Yeah.
known as my moniker, the balance professor, for over now a good 32 years in the industry. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just fantastic. And, Chicago was, later on, as before I moved to LA and Chicago, I felt like I really felt like the creme de la creme after I put my years in, and a gentleman opened up this large personal training studio, and everybody that worked there were like, I come in and I never worked at East Bank, but a ton of these trainers
Yeah.
worked at East Bank, and some other,
Yeah.
basically we were the top trainers in Chicago, going out on our own and stuff. So, I want to thank you again for, everything you did for me. It led me a path to really, being able to fulfill my, what I call my curiosity. My favorite line
Hmm.
or my thought when I was thinking about when I was a kid, and I had this picture of me just kind of sitting, it was like a young little look. I should probably get that picture and show it. I'll put it on the final cut here. But I always remember just saying the two words, "What if?" And
Yes.
that sense of curiosity and what if, right? And I love that description you said about that. When things are scary and are hard, they're engaging, and
Yeah.
they shake the tree and make you feel alive. Now, I know that you went
Hmm.
on, into teaching, and then you mentioned something about some taekwondo. So how'd you get into teaching?
Well, I went to school for exercise physiology at UIC, got my master's there. Then I was going to go to medical school, and I was accepted. And there's a whole series of interviews and everything. They were looking for older people with more experience. I'd been a paramedic, had dealt with the dead and the dying, and that's the type of people they were looking for. So one of the last interviews, they asked, "How old is your daughter?" And she was about 3 at the time. So the doctor's crunching there. He says, "You might make it to her high school graduation, but don't count on it." So my wife and I, because my wife's an attorney working 60 hours a week. If I'd gone to medical school, our daughter would have been an orphan. So I said, okay. And then I said, I want to teach history. So, because I've always been a history buff. And so I went to graduate school for a master's in education and history and political science, things that have always motivated me and interested me. So when I finished my master's, there were no jobs around in social studies. So
Mm.
they told me, well, with your background, you can teach PE. And I'd never really had a PE course. Everything, stuff that I did was in the lab, was lipid metabolism and, cardiac regulation. I didn't know how to keep score in tennis. Have no particular interest in sports and that. So I said, you know what? I'll teach PE until I can move laterally into a history job. Well, it didn't happen. So I started, and the only history I got to teach was with my student teaching. One of my finest 10 weeks ever. I loved it. And it was always one of my history things as a teacher was, what if? What if the other side won the score? What if? What if? What if? Think of what can happen. Get curious. I said, think of that you're making a movie about history and you can change any part of it. Take it in, take it out. And that got kids interested in history, which a lot of kids for some reason don't like.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so
I
then,
just have
so
to
I,
stop you right now because
yeah,
I can you hear me? I had to stop
yes.
you right now. The fact that you knew that what if and fate in the universe, oh my gosh, I guess it was just destiny
Yeah.
to
I
destiny to what if guys showed up and bumped heads.
yeah. No. But it makes you think of how history, whether it's wars or leaders or economic downfalls, what if? What would have happened after that if this hadn't happened? Think of how the world can go
Right.
this way and that way just by happenstance, or you know the Archduke Franz Ferdinand wasn't shot, and we didn't have
Yeah.
World War One. And what would have happened with the economy in Europe? And it's fascinating. You can take that with any part of history and make your own movie about it,
Hmm. So then,
like
so
Marty
you
McFly.
did you did you now you were teaching, and where was your first teaching job?
I started. I was did my student teaching at Regina Dominican, which is a girls' Catholic school where I was coaching, and
Is that Chicago?
I would Wilmette, so just northern suburb. And I would love to have stayed there, but with a Catholic school, especially at the time, you had to take the vow of poverty. They just didn't pay much. So I went over to our local high school and did whatever they wanted. I was a department sub, um, substituted whatever they needed, I did. And I dragged my feet when it was math because I always hated math. But
Oh,
I
you
got a
and
lot
me
of
both.
experience doing that, and then a PE job popped up at a middle school. So I said, I'm going to take it, see what happens. And I stayed there for 15 years or so until last June.
Hmm.
Never got to teach
Okay.
history or social studies or art for that matter. There was an art opening and I didn't
Oh,
get it. I would love to have taught art.
so all the, sometimes the focus of effort and your intention, and then the laws of what fate and opportunity and interest,
Yes.
and you have these other
Mortgage payments.
opportunities.
Yeah.
There you go. And then how did you you mentioned here that a grandmaster, another maybe obviously another
Yes.
mentor of yours, Grandmaster Joseph Conway.
Yes.
Tell us more about
Yep. So,
Joseph.
well, I'd started Taekwondo when I was at Rutgers and competed down there with, trained with the man who actually made up the term Taekwondo back in 1955, Grandmaster Duke Sung Sun. And
Is Taekwondo
um,
Korean or
it's Korean. So the Korean masters, when Japan um, really ruled Korea, all these masters study Japanese martial arts, karate. And so when the Japanese had left Korea, all the main masters got together and said, we need to make this Korean. We're all Korean. Let's give it a Korean name and Korean flavor. So Duke Sung Sun came up with the term Taekwondo, which means the way of the hand and foot. And that's the way it's been ever since. And it's split into two different groups. But uh, all of that leads me to, I got injured in college and had to stop it for 25 years. And one of my
was that
friends,
the
his
Achilles?
daughter, huh? No, I tore my
Was that
hamstring right off the
your
bone, right off the ischial
oh,
tuberosity. So
oh.
yeah, they when it popped, they said they heard it in the gym downstairs below us. It was a bad one, and I didn't have it taken care of until about 6 or 7 years ago. I just lived on scar tissue that whole time, so they had to take my
You are an
whole butt
you're
apart
you
and
are an
reattach
animal.
everything.
You are an
I
animal.
limped a lot. I limped.
I mean,
So
I can
anyway,
tell. I can
yeah.
keeping up with you. I mean, it's just amazing because you know your life is so full and you get kept so busy and engaged with obviously a people person and stuff. And so, the Taekwondo, how do you still practice that, or is that something that's
I
fallen off?
it fell off after I had the surgery to repair my hamstring. But I'd gotten into it again. I always loved Taekwondo. One of my friends, our daughters were in school together. He was a professor at Northwestern, and we were talking at dinner one night about Taekwondo. He was a black belt, and he says, I said I loved it. I did it in college, and I got injured. I couldn't do it. And he says, you should come back, take a class, see what it's like. So I said, I'm out of shape, this and that. So I went back, and that was it. I had to do it again. Started back down at white belts, worked my way up to black belt, and eventually did a third dan, and then taught in the Evanston schools, and um, just enjoy doing it again. Again, it was sharing knowledge. But Grandmaster
Right.
Conley, a very, very quiet man, soft spoken, smaller than me. Um, but he had such, and it comes with having all the stripes on your belt. You have respect just for that. But one of the things he taught me, besides great technique, although I never got as good as I wanted to be, he says one of the best ways to learn is by making mistakes. Don't fault yourself. Use that mistake as stepping stone to make your technique, your knowledge that much stronger. And you're always embarrassed
Right.
about making mistakes, but at the end of class, and we had a black belt class, black belts only on Monday nights, and we would get in a circle and let it out. And like someone say, I don't have a clue how to do this movement in this pattern. Um, and there was never like any embarrassment. Um, we knew that if we said, I need help with this, we would get the best knowledge, the best training from this man who never held anyone, out saying, oh, how come you didn't learn that or anything like that. He was one of the best teachers
Right.
I've ever had. Besides being completely knowledgeable, he was so approachable, even though people feared him because he was so powerful for a little guy. Um, but he taught me
To
how
me,
to
to
make
me,
mistakes.
oh yes, to me, this puts up a something in what makes me think about, relating it to my experiences in the fitness in general. And
Yeah.
when you talk about when people come in, or if you're a student, whatever, and you're trying to learn that, you're trying to get better, and it's almost people
Mhm.
carry in this doubtful energy or what they can do
Yes.
while they're actually doing it or attempting to do it. They're still holding this
Yeah.
psychological part of like, oh, I know I need to work out, I know I need to do better. And I've
Yeah.
had clients just, all through the times where they would literally apologize that when they'd make any kind of mistake. And it was almost like, no, you're here and we're rolling through. And it's just, I just find it interesting because how it relates to, if you want to say teacher, mentor, instructor, and all these experiences that are powerfully remembered when somebody's not stressed out like the instructor or teacher, then that
Mhm.
sets the tone for the energy of the class and allows students to learn and be not, they're
Yes.
already intimidated to a degree.
Yes.
And,
Hmm.
I think it's just a wonderful thing that, um, what makes a good teacher, a good student, right? So I'm almost
Hmm.
anymore these days, I hold the like, hey, I, I, you know, I'm still here to learn. And this is what I've got going. So let's do some stuff and let's see if we can trip into
Yeah.
some other things that are beneficial. And oftentimes I empower myself for the next student.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um,
Um,
no, it was just, and you talk about the intimidation when someone's starting something new and they're not, maybe poor self-image, or you go in and someone who's going to train with you and your vast knowledge of physiology and training, and they think, oh, I'm an idiot. And they're not. They are there to learn, which is a special person who comes to learn to accept knowledge and absorb it. And I remember going to class and sparring with black belts when, I first returned to it and I was older and, when I was a color belt, and here I am sparring, with a third degree black belt at the time, and realizing that he wasn't there to beat me up, he was there to teach me. And if he had something to say, do this, do that, I did it, I learned. And it was just, it was addictive to go. And I don't think and I did a lot of classes for a lot of years. I don't think I ever left a class without learning something, maybe not gigantic, but something I've never forgotten to this day. Um, and and
mhm.
maybe I'll go back and do it, but uh, I'm turning 70, so it's and Grandmaster Conley's older than I am, but sort of held together with surgeries on my toes and my hamstring and that sort of thing. Um, but you don't have to go in and break 19
Well, you,
boards. You have to go in and try your best and take some new knowledge home with you. That's all you have to do.
well, well, you look fantastic. And so I want to know, mentioned it's like, so you wasn't sure, you never considered being a teacher, but then wait, what's this? What about you wanting to be a pilot? I recently been certified as uh,
I know.
got my Part 107 as a remote drone pilot, and that,
Yes.
in order to be a drone pilot and have a certificate and do it for business, you have to know everything a actual pilot knows, man pilot.
Pilot does, yeah.
And once I figure it out and I'm learning about what a man pilot needs to know and the kind of responsibilities and what that involves, I'm
Yes.
like, I have a lot of respect for those
Wow.
guys. And so
Yes.
what's this about the pilot? Tell me about when did you want to be a pilot?
Like, when I was a kid, I was fascinated with flying. Um, I'd stop in the streets and stare up at planes going by. And being essentially a product of World War II, my dad had served uh, Normandy invasion and everything. And we watched all the army shows that came out in the 50s. I was born in 55, so there was still plenty of army shows out there. And I got, for whatever reason, obsessed with aircraft. So, like many young boys did, I had model airplanes. And you and I have toured air museums. I used to know the armament, the wingspan, the fuel capacity, top speed, diving
Oh
speed, all of
goodness.
that for every
You were in
World
it.
War II plane there was. And I always thought, God, I'd love to fly one of those things. And of course, never did. I did sit in the controls in a friend's plane once, but it was on autopilot. We just did it for taking pictures. um, but it was fun, and
Hmm.
people say do that in your retirement. I said, I want to learn landscaping and woodworking and all of that. It seems so expensive to become a pilot, and I'm still not good with math, and I still have motion sickness issues.
Oh my goodness. So with your, gosh, who would have thunk it, right? You're selling selling athletic shoes, running shoes,
Yes.
go into the club, have that major mentor there. You knew you were obviously heading to school. Now, did you meet your wife before you started going to school, or when did you meet your wife? Where did you meet your wife?
Um, well, let's see. Probably when I was in graduate school for exercise phys. She was in law school, um, and she was the top
This is in
runner in the
Chicago.
Midwest. So in Chicago, yeah. So she'd come out, and her goal besides being a good lawyer was to compete in the Olympic trials in the marathon. It was the first women's Olympic trials uh, for the marathon. So she was focused on that. I was doing shorter distance stuff. And so we didn't see much of each other when we were dating. She, to this day, she's upstairs working. She's retiring in about 2 months, and she's upstairs working right now. So that's the way she is. So we
Okay.
didn't see a lot of each other, and um, we just had a lot in common, and had very little to do with running. We liked Bob Dylan music. We liked camping. We liked roughing it when we camped.
All the
So,
important,
we used to
all the
backpack.
all the important things, right?
Yes, all the important things. We like Mexican food. Um, and and the odd thing
Okay.
was her
And so
stepmother went
when
to
you
my
were
high
in
school.
school, oh yeah. So when you were school, so were you working at the club, or you had
Yes.
gotten to start to school, you came back to work part time, and so
Yeah.
you had a child, so
Uh,
you were like hunkering down to get that degree, whatever.
yes. Well, I did when I was in grad school for exercise phys. I decided to just work part time because I had, anatomy classes, labs and everything like that they only offered during the day. So um, I'd do it as much as I could. I'd be in the lab dissecting, and then have to go to work smelling like formaldehyde, working till midnight, then having to get all the studying done. Um, so it was really hard. My wife was my motivation. She just didn't like me whining that I was tired. That yes, you're in school all day, but now you got to go to work, or you'd work at 5 in the morning and then go to school after that. You just do it, and you'll be satisfied. So it was her pushing that did it, but I kept on getting job offers So the department chair at UIC, where I went for exercise phys, she would say, "Oh, Vin, if you take another couple of months off, it's going to make your graduation that much later, and on and on." And I said, "But I got to take this job. This is a great job. Oh, you do it. You come back." So she's like this mom, and she all the
She's
time, "Vin, not another
pushing you
job."
hard.
Uh,
Did you
she
about
pushed
your
me hard.
Boy
Uh,
Scout days or something? Good
yeah,
leadership, and
yeah.
she
Well,
was like, you talk the new field.
she
When
was.
when you're entering a new adventure, was she similar to that nature? How did when she met you, did she realize, she saw this guy, all these different interests, and end up here, and so obviously
Well,
you
she
teamed
knew
up,
that I
and
wanted to.
um, you know,
Yeah,
th-
she wanted me to graduate, but she knew that the reason I was in school was to get better at my job. So she was very supportive, very motherly. Um, yeah, she was Marion Kinnear was her name. She was one of the pioneers of women's softball and sport in general. She was very instrumental in women's
oh,
sports, way back when.
so what would what kind of advice would, I mean, what do you find that, like, between, we know that communication is an art form, and it's
Mm.
wonderful when it happens. It's a beautiful thing when it happens. But what do you find, like, the most important when changing directions, right? Career paths and stuff. What have you found that
Mhm.
I don't know, is that an innate quality that you believe you have to tackle things like that, or what have you seen in your teaching days? And I'm sure you've seen many people like me come across your path.
Mm. Well, I guess it is. I I have to stay motivated. It has to be interesting. Otherwise, um, if it's not challenging, it's not attractive to me. So like, staying at the East Bank Club, we had a whole accounting, advertising departments, everything like that. I wanted to work at a club where I actually designed the logos for the club, worked with electricians, got up on the roof and patched where the expansion joints were cracking. Um, all stuff that I did, cleaning toilets, checking pool chemicals when I was the manager of a club, because you get completely wrapped up in it. And I think if people, forget about titles and rank and all of that stuff and treat your job as your home, as long as you keep things in perspective. Um, and that's one thing I found in teaching
Hmm.
and then coaching afterwards, and then dealing with parents at night, you lose sight of your primary goal. And with me, it's my family. And I think all the years that I coached, my kids had to go to childcare afterwards. And I loved I coached for 40 years. But I think a lot of times once my daughter was born, I wish I'd left coaching and hung out with her and played with her. Because you don't get that time back.
Mm.
So, get involved, treat your job as you know, your reason for being. You should enjoy it that much that it's
Hmm.
part of you. But don't neglect, you know, your health, your time for yourself, or your family.
That's awesome. And I have this quote from you. I have to read this, and because I think it's a very powerful message, and a statement, for those of all ages, mentors and mentees. Vinny says, I've had so many important moments in my life, and I guess that collectively they've taught me to dive in and try something that seems fascinating and scary. Then find a mentor to calm your nerves and show you the ropes, while allowing and accepting inevitable mistakes. So, I mean, that is just poetic. Um, and it just fits right into the strong message of this podcast. It's been a very rewarding career, and again, I can't thank you enough. You're the man. That was fantastic. Um, I really appreciate you, Vinny. Love you, man. give my best to your family, and God bless. All right, Vin. I'll see you. We'll keep in touch. I'll talk to you, but take care, buddy. Thanks again. All right, you too, man. Thanks. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Professor.